Hi, my name is Alexandra, and this is part of the series of conversations I'm having with people around the world who are practicing ancestral work in some way or form and are the systemic family constellations facilitators as well. And today I am very pleased to have this conversation with Tanja Meyburgh in Cape Town, who is the founder of African Constellations and the co-founder of Ancestral Connections and Real Academy. Welcome, Tanja.
Thank you, Alex. Pleased to be here.
Great. So I'm just going to go straight into the questions. And my first question to everyone is, what are ancestors? What does it mean for you, the way you work with it, the way you understand it? Yes, and what can you say about ancestors?
I think my understanding of ancestors comes primarily from my training and learning in one of the Southern African ancestral traditions with a teacher that I've been working with for about 7 years now. So in this tradition, there's various types of ancestors. It's not only our family ancestors. We have ancestors of the air, we have ancestors of the soil, of the fire, and of the water. So what I am interested in is obviously with constellation work, primarily we've been working with ancestors of the air. These are the ancestors of the family lineage. So they would be all the ancestors that are directly related to you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, those that are of your blood lineage. Included in here, though, also, as we know in constellation work, are ancestors that have in some way bonded into our family. So ancestors of the air are really also those that have been connected through marriage, through difficult events that have happened in the family, but mostly we're referring to the ancestors of the family lineage, the air ancestors. This understanding of ancestors is a bit wider than a lot of understanding that people have just of family ancestors, because we also have ancestors of the water, the soil, the fire. The fire ancestors refer to those that have been murdered or killed in war, or in some way have died in a difficult circumstance. The ancestors of the soil are those that are buried in a certain place. So when you go to a place, you would greet the ancestors of the soil and you would announce yourself to them, so that you come in a way without just kind of barging into their territory or onto their land or into their place. And the ancestors of the water are the ancestors that connect us, that connect all of us. So the idea is that through drinking water or through the cycle of water, there's an imprint, there's a memory that passes through our systems that moves all around the world. So you may find that somebody in one part of the world becomes really interested in a spiritual tradition from another part of the world. And those ancestors are considered to be the ancestors of the water. So these are the different types of ancestors that I work with. And particularly because I have an interest in land constellations as well, I would say mostly with the air and the land ancestors, the soil ancestors.
Thank you. You've mentioned that you work with them. What does it mean for you when you say working with ancestors?
I think the thing for me is that I started with family constellations. That was my main training before I went into the African traditions. Interestingly enough, I found constellation work because I had been told that I was called to become an ancestral practitioner through the African traditions. But I never found it, it sort of didn't feel right for me as a white South African with European lineage to sort of go fully into an African tradition. So when I discovered constellation work, that was really an exciting moment for me, because I realized that this is a way to work with ancestors that feels more in line with my own ancestral lineage and with my own knowledge lineage, having trained in systems therapy, and also, you know, trained in systems theory. So I think, and also having German ancestors. So I have German ancestors as well. So it felt like it was more of a fit in terms of my own ancestors. So most of my work has been in the last 18 or 19 years with ancestors through family constellations. But in the last years, I also realized that there are aspects of the African tradition that I really resonate with. Partly also the dance, and which is something that is also done by ancestral practitioners in African traditions. And also, as I said, these different ancestors, not just the family ancestors, and how do we include them? And I think a lot of people have, by going into nature constellations and working particularly with war and peace, and not just with families. So sort of looking at the bigger ancestral family. So for me, working with them has been mostly in constellations, but I do also have my own private or personal practice, I would say. So what that includes is actually addressing my ancestors and working with them on a personal level regularly, that I keep the channels of communication open, and that I have them as a resource and support. So when I go into my constellation work, it's not just with the constellation philosophy and focus. It has a lot of support and resource from that connection that I developed through other practices, which are really my spiritual practices that are based in the African traditions.
So ancestral practice is part of your personal practice as well, right?
Yes.
So it's a spiritual practice, personal spiritual practice that you do as well.
Look, I do believe that when one's working with family constellations and with any kind of ancestral work, primarily you need to do your own work. If you're not in a good place with your own ancestors and with your own family lineage, then it's really actually almost dangerous to work with other people's ancestors, because there's a lot that you receive from your own practice with your ancestors, and if it isn't clean and clear, I've noticed that people struggle. They struggle with illnesses. They struggle with their energy levels. I personally feel that having some form of ancestral spiritual practice is kind of a prerequisite to stay healthy as a constellations practitioner. Especially, I mean, in my case, I work all day with it. I've been working all day with it every day for almost 17, 18 years. And I'm very aware of the potential for burnout, for fatigue, for illnesses. I've seen a lot of facilitators struggle, and so yes, that self-care. If you're working in ancestral fields, you need to do your self-care in ancestral fields as well. That is very clear for me. Yeah.
That partly touches on my next question, and maybe you could speak a bit more about it. So I was going to ask, why would one want and need to work with ancestors? What does it? What are the benefits? What does it bring you? And you mentioned, as a facilitator, the need to do that. To do your own work, but also say not a facilitator, and somebody who maybe has a completely different background and maybe has never even thought about ancestors in such a way before. Why would anyone want to start looking that way?
I think often people are called in some way. Certainly facilitators and people that are interested in working with ancestors are called to this work. in some way. I mean, in my was through illness. In many traditions on the African continent, it's through illness. So certain illnesses are recognized as a calling to work with ancestors. But if you're talking about the lay person, I think for many people, there is also some kind of calling or some kind of synchronicity that happens. So I believe that you are called, or that one of your ancestors will let you know in some way. Whether it's through you keep on seeing adverts for family constellations, or there's a kind of an interest, or you feel like drawn towards something. I always say to people that actually I think that the ancestral work calls you. In some way, it finds you. And if it's something that keeps coming up, that keeps knocking on your door, or you feel almost like an attraction or a resonance with it, then it's worth exploring and seeing, you know. So I don't normally say to people, you know, if you have this kind of problem or that kind of problem, it's a good idea to look into ancestral work. I think everyone can benefit from ancestral work. I think everybody can benefit from realizing that there are resources available. And I don't think we necessarily need to even go into entanglements or into difficulties with ancestors. One can actually start purely by looking at what are the things that my ancestors endured, that my ancestors got through, that they experienced. What can I learn from that? What is actually contained in me, in my ancestral field, in my physical body? Because I really do believe that there's that genetic memory and that epigenetic memory is with us. So it's really about finding strength and resource from past experience. So I mean, in the African tradition, I think it's clearer than in Western culture around elders being the wise ones. You know, those that have had life experience are the ones that we turn to. We don't turn necessarily just to people who've got a big degree, or, you know, who've been trained in medicine. We turn to the people that have had life experience and that also are in a position to observe. So when people are older, they have more time to sit and to watch. And if they are part of the community, or in situations where you don't lock your elders away from the community, the elders actually sit and they watch what's going on. And those that are in the struggles and in the difficulties, and are busy working and parenting and trying to make a living and doing all of these things, they can't see because they're in it. Whereas the elders have this distance, and they've got this this view that is imbued with experience and life knowledge. And so you would go to them and they would help you to see sort of the broader view, the wider view, which is, I think, also something that we do in constellation work. We kind of zoom out and we start to look at, hang on a sec, it's not just this. It's not just you, the individual. It's this. Yeah. I actually can't remember what your question was anymore. What's just going on?
But talking about it, you know, and as we started to laugh a little bit before we began, you mentioned something about humor being important to ancestors. Say a little bit more about this.
So, I mean, this is something that was very special from my teacher. You know, he was, I was trained in working with traditional healing through something called patla, which is an address to the ancestors. And basically what this means is that we talk to them. And it's not like you go to, you know, you go sort of into a different part of yourself where you become all formal and now you sort of tiptoe around your ancestors and you do a special ceremony with them. It's actually just sitting with them every day. Yes, there are things that we do, like we wear a cloth like this over the shoulders, which symbolizes that we're small and that they are big. But basically, when you talk to your ancestors, you just chat to them, just like they would, like it's your granny or your grandpa. So you talk to them as if they're just ordinary people that are there, very respectfully, obviously, because they are elders. And you tell them about the wonderful things that are happening in your life, the difficult things that are happening in your life. So what I love about that is that actually you're just talking to, you know, you're talking to human beings, or people that were human beings. And the sort of understanding is that they're never really gone. They're always with us. I mean, they're air ancestors. They're accessible all the time. It's not like they have gone off to some place somewhere in the sky. And so, yeah, and just in terms of the laughter and stuff, like sometimes when I chat to them and I imagine what would they be saying to me now, you know, I get a good big chuckle coming and a bit of a laugh. And I really love that about, you know, the grannies and the grandpas here that I have contact with in South Africa. You know, there's just a lot of laughter. And even when there's like big struggle and real difficulties, the laughter is medicine. And it's not laughing at or sort of making light of. It's that deep belly laughter that's actually really just a part of being human, and recognizing that even, you know, when we're crying, we can cry, we can dance, we can be in joy, we can laugh. It's all part of the human experience. And that I think people sometimes take their ancestral and their spiritual traditions maybe a little bit too seriously. And that humor is really an important part of healing and being able to just let go a little, you know, just let go a little. So I've got some giggling ancestors that sometimes visit me. Yeah.
Brilliant. I haven't heard about it like this before, so I really appreciate this nugget about laughing ancestors. This is like a laughing Buddha.
Yes. Yes. When I was in India last year, I was what's the word, prescribed laughing yoga by the Ayurvedic doctors, and it was just the best thing ever. I absolutely loved it. It's completely silly, but you laugh for an hour solid, and it is such fabulous medicine. It's really amazing. So even, you know, in that ancient Ayurvedic tradition, there's a place also for laughter as medicine. It really is medicine. Yeah. Don't take yourself so seriously. That's my take. Yeah.
Lovely. You mentioned something just now about the ancestors being the living ancestors, that they're not the thing of the past. Can you say a little bit more about it? And maybe something I've met before is the concept that the further away the ancestors are from us in time, in our time, the more enlightened in a way they are for us, becoming more of a resource, that the pain is mostly in the recent generations, the closest to us. Do you see it in that way as well?
I think in constellation work we sort of don't work too many generations back, but the understanding for me is the bigger the trauma, or the wider the mass, if it's a sort of a mass trauma, it can impact quite a few generations back. So I don't sort of have that concept of them being more enlightened further back, but of course they are different. And when I work with ancestors that come from further back, we also need to see them in the context of their time. So sometimes when we're talking to ancestors that are further back, we may say things like, you might not recognize this platform that we're working on. Here we're working with computers and this strange screen, and it may seem strange because the person is not actually in their body right here. This is something of the future. You may not recognize this. So sometimes we even have to introduce them to things that we have in the present, because for them, maybe cars and computers and the things that we are using are not, they don't, they've never heard of them. So one would actually introduce them to that. So, I mean, it's an interesting thought, because we're busy working with a workshop at the moment called For the Future in Ancestral Connections. And in this workshop, we're bridging from the past right through to the future, working with previous generations, working with the future generations. And it's been really, really interesting to see what happens when you start to set up future generations and you start to look at yourself as an ancestor of the future. And what it is that we can work and do in ourselves that we can really step up as good resources for future generations. So I think every ancestor, whether they grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, in my view, have resources to give, no matter how evil somebody may decide to sort of label them, or no matter what they did. Even in absolutely atrocious acts, one may find a strength or an ability to overcome a challenge. So this is our task, in a way, is to begin to recognize what are the resources of all these ancestors. The ones further back, I think, have perhaps resources like they knew how to grow vegetables. They knew how to survive famines without shops. There's just so many possibilities for accessing wisdom and strength to get through whatever we're experiencing. But in different ways. Their resources are not necessarily better or worse, but just different. Yeah. I mean, I like to often connect people back to, when there's been a lot of genocide and there's been a lot of war and trauma, to actually connect back to the ancestors before that, and to imagine what it was like to have weddings and feasts and, harvest festivals and winter bonfires and, all those family rituals that were so enlivening and healing, and for people to remember that there are people in their family that had those experiences, and that it's not just devastation and trauma and war and genocide, and that those people are also still living inside of them. Because we do tend to bond and connect very strongly to those difficult experiences and carry them like a weight around, but actually there's also so much more. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sitting here quietly fascinated, because what is happening right now is, as you talk, I kind of, I catch a thought and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this would be a good question to follow. And then you immediately start talking about this question and I'm going, huh, interesting. So you continue to talk and I think, oh, this is a nice topic, I will ask that. And then you move to talk about that. So I'm just sitting here going, I'm not going to think of a question of my head. So that you don't say it before I ask it.
Maybe your ancestors and my ancestors are already chatting somewhere and sharing the questions, and we can just look at each other. They can do the conversation.
Yeah, right. So I do have another question. Following from what you were saying, one of the questions that you kind of touched on was regarding the future generations and becoming a good ancestor to the future. So and you've mentioned, you know, in that regard, you've mentioned the resources that the previous generations hold, and how our task is to start seeing them, to start seeing what the resources are, so that we can start receiving them, so that then they can flow forwards into the future. So my question is around, what if you can share a little simple ritual or ceremony or exercise, I don't know, some sort of simple way that anyone, even if they've never seen a constellation before, could start accessing those resources, maybe could start building that relationship with their ancestors, and seeing them in a different way.
Sure. Look, the very first thing I always suggest to people, and it depends on the client, I'm going to give you two options. There's the option that I always suggest as an initial, and that is creating a space in your home that is a place for your ancestors. So in a way, just by creating a space, you're inviting them. And as soon as you invite them, you know, in these traditions, the idea is that you thank and you ask. It's kind of basic. I mean, a basic for many traditions. In prayer, in patla, you say thank you for what you received, and you ask for what you need. And so by creating a place, you're saying you're welcome. So what that means is really just, and it's important that you choose this place that it's not in your bedroom. So we don't like to put our ancestors in a place where we have relations or where we have sex. The idea is just simply that, you know, that's private, and it's not something that we do in front of our ancestors. So the idea would be to, somewhere in your living room or in your private space, just to put up a little a candle and maybe a few objects that represent, and you can work with that and build it. To put pictures of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, it's really up to you. It's just literally creating a symbolic place that they then have a space in your home, and you can go to it and you can say hi and you can greet, and you can ask and you can thank. So that's a very sort of simple version of it. I mean, it can get a lot more complicated, but really one can keep it very simple with a candle and some photos. I think in some cultures, this is just an obvious thing that you do, but I think in many Western cultures, we've totally forgotten this idea. So that would be the first thing. And then what I invite people to do is, as they start to connect to various resources or strengths or gifts that they may receive from their ancestors, and this sometimes just comes in almost synchronous moments, like you'll be cleaning up your house and then you'll find a photograph of somebody. As soon as you start connecting to your ancestors find ways to connect to you as well. And they do it in whatever ways that they can, whether it's photographs or sort of synchronous meetings with people in the park. I mean, maybe it's a bit more difficult in lockdown to have those synchronous moments, but they'll find a way. And then to put objects that represent those gifts and those resources onto this place of the ancestors, so that you can remember. It's like, oh yeah, you know, we use stones, we use figures, you can do anything, leaves, little bits and pieces from nature. It's really so deeply personal. Everybody's relationships with their ancestors, it's a deeply personal process, and it's really just following. There's some basic rules, like the bedroom, and also, you know, sort of going there in a respectful and reverent way. And then the other sort of option, for those of you that are not into the sort of the more ritual way of working, so it depends on my clients. Sometimes I have, you know, CEOs of companies who really, that's not their scene, they're not interested. Then we just do a list. Write down your mother, write down your father, your grandfather, and your grandmother, and what qualities would you like? What are their what are their beautiful qualities, or what are their and yes, your mind might go into all the terrible things that they did, and but it's a real exercise to work out what actually were they good at, and then list that, and then just keep that there somewhere, so that you really and in a way you can thank them for those qualities, because it's possible for you to switch them on in yourself. No. I mean, you have more access to them if your ancestors had those qualities than if they didn't. The rest of us may have to work extra hard for some of those things, you know. So that's an easy way to connect and to open up the channels. So just being grateful for what it is that you did receive. Yeah.
Thank you so much for it. It sounds really exactly what I wanted. Not that what I wanted to hear, but you know, it sort of exactly answers the question. It's simple, and not necessarily requires any special learning experience and things. And as you said, deeply personal. So this is perfect. Thank you. Following on something you mentioned, and this might be a slightly challenging question in some way. You've mentioned that you wouldn't put ancestors into your bedroom because there are things there that you do that are deeply private and you don't want them in the same space, which kind of makes me question whether there is an exclusion of some sort happening of the sexuality of the human being. And I imagine all ancestors know what it means because we're here. So at least once they've been through that experience and, you know, passed the life on. So I'm wondering why in this tradition you would separate the two. I mean, I understand why, but I'm curious about a bit more what stands behind that.
You know, sometimes you just this is a tricky one, because sometimes in the which is part of the reason part of the reason why some of the sort of traditional stuff is quite difficult, because sometimes there are just rules that you follow and there are exclusions that you follow, because that's how it is. In constellation work, we say to children that this has got nothing to do with you, this thing that's between your parents. It's a little bit the same. It's just in the other direction. So your ancestors wouldn't do this in front of you because it's got nothing to do with you. This is between adults and you are the children. So out of respect, we also don't do it in front of them. That's the kind of understanding, in my understanding of it. Yeah. So it's not about excluding sexuality in any way. I mean, I don't think that's the idea at all. It's about certain ways of approaching, behaving, and speaking to elders that are respectful. So, you know, a lot of people rebel against this because it is quite rule-based and it is quite patriarchal, and it's difficult for me as well in you know, living in South Africa and watching the sort of patriarchal aspect of these things, but it feels right to me, you know, this rule. So when I've set up my own ancestral shrine, which I have behind me over there by the fireplace, fireplace is always a really good place to do your place for the ancestors. It didn't feel right at all to do it in my bedroom. So maybe if you don't like the idea of being told this thing, it's to test it out, to walk around and feel in your body, where does it feel right? Okay, so now you know, I've said maybe not in the bedroom, but really test it out. If you're very convinced that it should be in the bedroom, then you need to work with what you need to work with. I mean, I think it's a tricky one, because there's it's again, it's this thing of, do we follow the ancient rules and trust that they're there for a reason, or do we just want to do our own thing? And if you are really listening to your ancestral communications, I get a feeling they might not be so keen on it being in your bedroom. But I'm all for people finding their own way and really working with their own inner wisdom.
Thank you for this answer. I think it is quite a tricky question, and you've given a beautiful perspective on it that makes sense to me now. So this is great. So I'm wondering, you've mentioned in the beginning how you first came to constellation work, and then you introduced yourself to the African tradition. So now, when you work with both, what is the role of a constellation method when you combine it with the ancestral work shamanically, or in a different tradition?
So I wouldn't necessarily say that I work that strongly with the African tradition. I would say that it informs my practice in terms of my understanding, and it is my personal support and resourcing practice, the patla. I do work sometimes with the patla, but I'm also very aware of sort of cultural appropriation, and it's quite complicated. Taking or working in a tradition that belongs to another culture and other people. So I'm really aware of that. So I would say that my work is predominantly family and systems constellations, and the way that the African traditions inform is through my understanding of the ancestral field. So I don't bring a lot of the African work in. Even every now and then I will do a patla, just because it's needed, and I feel my ancestors ask for it, and that is the medicine that I'm trained in. It's basically, it's like, some people confuse it with praying to the ancestors. It's not praying to the ancestors. It's speaking to them. It's being in community with them. It's being in communion with them. And there's still a belief in God and creation, a source, the Great Spirit, whatever you choose to call it. It's not a worship of the ancestors. It's a request for their support and for their blessing and their gifts. So I think it deeply informs my understanding of constellation work, but so does narrative therapy. So I sit with these two extremes, the one that is extremely rule and structure based and extremely, this is the way we do it. And then this more constructivist way of seeing the world, where I'm mostly interested in people's individual experiences and not in what is a complete truth. So my constellation work doesn't look like Hellinger's work at all. In some ways it does, because his early work is very deeply informed, I think, through the African traditions, especially if you look at it at the classical constellations, where you sort of had the problem image and then it was set up into the solution image. Sort of, we do this and then we move everybody into their right positions. This is very close to the African traditions. You seat people in their correct positions, because there is a correct position for people to be in. Whereas in a more constructivist approach, there's definitely more space for, well, what is your personal experience? How does it feel for you? What's happening in your body? So in a way, I'm dancing between these two extremes with the constellation work. But yeah, I mean, that's it's almost like, again, the bridging of the old and the new. It's the bridging of the old patriarchal system with the emergent future that's unfolding. And how do we do that? How do we respect and honor our ancestors and their ways, and at the same time live in a world that's completely changing, and where we don't have these traditional roles anymore, we don't have these gender stereotypes anymore, or we have them, but you know, things are changing so rapidly, and how do we meet that? Yeah.
Thank you. And you've mentioned the word dancing a couple of times now, and you, in the beginning, you said that this was one of the things that really attracted you in the African tradition, and I know that you've started. You found a way how to combine that with the constellation work.
Mm.
Tell me about that.
Mm. Well, you know, it started very, very organically, and really just as we had been constellating. We were out in Towerland Wilderness. We were on a retreat, a constellation retreat. I'd been constellating. It was all trainees, facilitating trainees. We'd been constellating for days, and we just all felt like a good dance. And Sean Palmer happened to be there, and she put on some music, and she facilitated a dance for us in the evening outside under the stars, and it was just what was needed. And in that moment, the two of us started talking about the possibility of using the dance as a resource for the constellation work, initially to warm up the body, to get the body ready for a representation, and then also to integrate and to process some of what was happening in the constellations afterwards. So originally we just juxtaposed it. We started with dance, did constellation work, dance, but it just started merging. And what we've sort of developed in the last 4 years is a full integration of the two, which we've called Ancestral Connections. And I mean, I think it comes out of a love for dance, but also just a realization that for me, sitting in days and days of workshops, I mean, when I do a 5-day training, my body is broken afterwards. All that sitting and standing and sitting and you know, I need to do a fair amount of body work and a lot of care of my body to manage these kind of sitting scenarios. Whereas with the Ancestral Connections, we just process what's happening in the body immediately. Simultaneously now, even, you know, sometimes we still work with the warm up and the integration at the end, but it's really quite amazing to be able to embody what's happening, or to embody the ancestors in the dance. I mean, also because dance is a universal language, you know, and we can speak right back to very early ancestors through dance. And everybody has a dancer inside of them. And I mean, it's not only dance. I mean, we also work with movement, we work with storytelling, we work with a lot of the sort of more ancient traditions that connect us into our ancestral lineages. And it's fun, you know, a little bit more of that sort of fun factor and a bit of laughter, and there can even be joy. And a lot of the focus that we have in this work is really on the resources and on strengthening and embodying. And we can meet extremely traumatic moments and extremely traumatized ancestors and stay present in our body and not have the difficulty of a re-traumatization or or disassociation or freezing, because we have that resource of the movement to move with whatever's emerging and to move, to keep it in movement. and to keep yourself grounded. So, I mean, I think more than anything, I just love it. I enjoy it. I enjoy the workshops. The results are incredible. So what people experience in movement, like 5 rhythms and movement medicine and these different conscious dance forms, is just sort of tenfold, because we now adding the ancestral and the constellation elements, so we can really move into the field and move into these really deep and profound spaces and have incredible results. So it's deep work, but it works. So yeah, that's really my passion at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for that. That touches on so many other points, like creativity, and something new emerging, and the new way to connect constellations to other practices, to the body practices as well. But I'm very aware of the time. So I think I would just like to ask one more thing before we close. And this is whether there is anything else that you would like to mention and to bring into this space, into this conversation.
I think I've said it already. The most important thing for me is that you find a way that resonates with you and that feels that you can include everything of your ancestral and your knowledge lineages. You know, so everything, if your practice can include all your life's experiences, all your teachers, all the things that have brought you to this point where you are right now, that for me is the most powerful option, the best path. That nothing gets excluded of your life and of your ancestral life. That it's all part of where you are right now, and in that way you really can stand in your full power, in your full strength, and with your greatest resources, and then amazing things are possible. I mean, I feel like I'm testimony to that in myself and my clients, people that I've trained. I've seen incredible transformations, and I know that this stuff works. So I really support that you find your personal way, that you find your unique path in this. Yeah.
Thank you. I do have one more little question.
Okay.
That can't not be answered, because it connects to something that we started this conversation with. So you've mentioned in the beginning the ancestors, not only of blood, but of air and of water and of fire. And we've mentioned in the ways how to start connecting with ancestors, the way to create a little shrine for them, a place where you invite them. Is that does that include all the different types of ancestors, or is that mainly for our blood ancestors? And then how do we connect with the others? Do we need to connect with the others?
I think it's really important to start with the ancestors of the air, which are our blood ancestors, our family ancestors. You know, I also think that in family constellations, it started with family constellations. And I think that it's really helpful if one learns the family constellation, connects with the ancestral, the air, the blood, as you say, the blood ancestors first. And then one can expand it to other things. But I mean, there are certain sort of the fire ancestors, we don't go there without help. And I wouldn't recommend that you go there without guidance. The ancestors of the soil, I mean, it's an easy one. You just, when you go to a new place, you just greet the people that were there before you, the first people, the people who lived there before you. So it's really just a greeting. Yeah. And then the water, you know, that's again, there's nothing really to do. It's just to acknowledge that we are all connected. We are all connected through the cycle of water. So there are ways to work with these things, and we do them in different ways, but I can't really give you a sort of a quick and easy answer for that, because certainly the fire ancestors, you don't go there unless you have somebody to take you in and bring you back again.
And remind me, please, the fire ancestors are which ones?
They're the ones that are killed in war and murder and the difficult fates. Yeah. The ones that didn't cross over in an easy way. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tanja. This has been a lovely, rich, and very beautiful conversation. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing all your wisdom with us and humor with us.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to share it. I love talking about these things. It's my passion.
Thank you.